Get your girl on that new.
Let's crossbreed or something.
That sounded hot.
Yeah.
That was my thing.
By the time we get it up next Tuesday, the world will be over.
There's no activity.
Shit, I wish I could talk right now. Hang on, there's some noise going on in my house. Hang on.
Actually, no, it was venti black, but I don't really want to get into it.
Probably Jason fucking Biggs.
You better regulate that.
Regulators.
Oh.
Mount up. Do we have a second?
I'm so white. I can't freestyle at all.
Kill your landlord. Kill your landlord.
It's not that I don't like them. I don't have the same zest for them as you guys.
I have zest for a lot of things. So
I'm zestfully clean. Welcome to episode 10 of the DBLBACK Podcast. I'm your host, Brent. Here joined by a few gentlemen. We had homework from episode 9 we'll get into, go over a couple different things. Really, that's what this podcast is for. It's a chance for me and my buddies to cover some of the things that maybe need a little bit more debate, or, if I don't have such a formulated opinion on, to write a post for the website, DBLBACK.com. This is a great forum for us to do that. So I want to welcome the other contributors here to the podcast and kind of bust right into this thing. Thank you very much for tuning into the podcast. I know I have Keith out here with me. Hey, Keith.
Hey, Brent, how you doing, man?
Good, bud. How's you?
What? Yeah, you's good. I'm good. Everybody's good, man. Thank you.
How's A, E, I, O, and sometimes Y? In addition to you?
Oh, thank you. Yeah, the vowel gang is in there like swimwear. Thank you.
Hey, fantastic. Schoolhouse rocks. Also, we got Dave on the podcast tonight.
How you doing, guys? Dave Fultz, Editor-in-Chief, DBLBACK. I got back on Sunday from a fantastic wedding in Minneapolis. I couldn't see straight for most of Sunday, which meant it was a good wedding on Saturday.
Weddings in which I end up blinded are always epic. Well, welcome back. We missed you last time on the podcast, so welcome back.
Yeah, man, you guys vibed on a bunch of stuff that I totally could have contributed on. You guys talked about Orange is the New Black. I'm totally up to date on that. We could have talked about how I find it awesome how in every episode the show has a cast so large that every episode can tell a story, but can also be a flashback to the life of someone on the show and how they ended up in prison. I think that's something that's fairly unique to that show.
Lost.
Lost it. Oh, holy shit.
Go ahead. Moving right along.
Is it every episode of Lost? They did a flashback to someone's thing?
Lost.
Well, at the end of this
like that the entire podcast with your voice real small like that?
At the end of Orange is the New Black, I doubt they'll reveal that they were all just in purgatory. Prison is not purgatory.
They weren't in purgatory.
Yeah, they were actually in a women's prison. The other thing that I find
difference.
To be pretty cool about it, and something that people who are on NPR podcasts and like nerdy liberals really like about the show, is that we also touched on last week about how you don't see women like this all the time on TV. I think it's really cool that it's one of the only shows out there where there's just a bunch of women interacting and they don't have to be talking about their boyfriends or talking about their prom dress or be talking about or throwing wine on each other like in the Real Housewives of wherever. It shows women a little bit exaggerated, than they normally are, but it shows women actually interacting with other women, which is a pretty cool thing about that show.
That's very cool, and as someone who doesn't watch the show but can appreciate just the, gender equality movement a little bit, not that a women's prison is the best forum to fight for women's rights, or a television show about a women's prison. I do love the idea that they just get to be people in a woman's prison instead of a bunch of catty bitch girls that are whining about fashion or something where most of the females in our televisions are. So
yeah, It's either that or they're talking to a guy or talking about a guy or being dependent to a guy. And, I mean, I guess I would call myself a feminist if push came to shove, but it's not how I choose my entertainment usually, but it's just a nice addition.
Hey, real quick, this is kind of a spin-off. It's not exactly about Orange is the New Black, but there's a show called Mistresses that my wife's into that I get roped into watching, and it shows women in pretty powerful, dominant positions too. So for all you listeners out there, we have a sensitive side.
Or if you have wives that like for you to watch TV with them but don't relinquish the remote.
That's pretty much what it is. I mean, she's got the remote on lockdown. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, if we're all honest to ourselves, most Hollywood is all blatant lies where the women don't have the power, because most of us that have women at home know how this thing really works. So yeah, we definitely missed you on the podcast. That stuff would have been.
It's not that she is like physically dominant and takes the remote, but I mean, I do have a newfound appreciation for reading on the other end of the couch while she watches TV. That's the way I get my reading done now. Is she'll be watching some other thing, and we are like physically in the same room, but I get to read. That's my reading time.
So you're physically present, but you're mentally and emotionally vacant.
Absolutely. Okay. That's what I'm going for here, Keith.
Yes.
Way to be.
Yeah, that's cool. Well, I need to boil it down to the most common denominator sometimes, you know.
And hopefully what you've learned is to not be mentally or emotionally vacant from the podcast in the future, so that you can help us double back on these topics.
It did feel really weird for you guys to be talking about things that are interesting in pop culture without being able to talk. I was listening to it while walking my dog the other day, just like talking to my dog and being like, hey, they missed this, Shoo, my dog. They totally missed this. I totally could have provided some insight into how every episode is also a flashback. Like, I totally could have told them that, but now I can't.
And now you know how our listenership feel and how people that are insane and talk to their dogs feel, too. So you're growing. You're growing, Dave, and we dig that about you, buddy.
I learn new things with every episode, whether I'm here or not.
Excellent. Good stuff. Since you're kind of doubling back on the last podcast, did you have any shows that that came to mind for you that maybe that first episode really hooked you?
My go-to answer whenever we talk about TV is The West Wing. So I will always talk about The West Wing, and The West Wing is actually conveniently right there on Netflix. So go watch the first episode of The West Wing on Netflix and tell me that you don't want to see more of Martin Sheen as the president. They save him for the last 5 minutes of the episode, and it makes it that much more powerful. It's awesome.
Good one. That's a show I never got into. I think I was too young to care and too dumb to realize I should care.
Bring me the finest bagels in the land.
Yes. The thing about The West Wing now when you watch it is the politics are fairly outdated in terms of what we have going on now versus what we had going on then. It's a pretty thinly veiled commentary on the Clinton presidency, so they're commenting a lot of times on stuff that was already a couple years old at the time of The West Wing, and now that show, started more than 15 years ago. Some of the politics is outdated, but if you are like me and you will never tire of Aaron Sorkin's writing, regardless of how similar each of his shows is, you'll really appreciate it. There's actually this thing which I thought about posting to the website on, which I think you guys would enjoy. It's called the Aaron Sorkin Supercut, and it's just like all of his shows at once, where there's an editor who cut together every time he reuses the same phrase across each of his TV shows and movies. So he has A Few Good Men and American President and West Wing and Sports Night and Studio 60 and a bunch of others. And you don't notice it when you're in the moment or when the show is in the moment, but he reuses so many of the same phrases. And for me, it never gets old, but maybe when some people can see through that veil, when the curtain is pulled back and you can see how the sausage is made, so I can mix more metaphors together. It loses its luster for
so you can see how Aaron Sorkin's sausage is made. Yeah, that's awesome. I hope you do link to that, because that's, I think there's certainly directors and writers that have their own style and their own language and things like that. But when there's blatant, obvious cannibalism of their own material a little bit, I don't think cannibalism was the right word there, but when they just blatantly rip off their own stuff, it's a little bit.
I mean, can you call it ripping off your own? It's your shit. Like, how can you rip it off?
It's almost like the word one-trick pony, except that trick is so good that I want to watch it over and over again. I literally would watch Aaron Sorkin make a show about some genre of show and just use the same lines, same plot lines, same everything, as long as it's just a new thing from Aaron Sorkin. He's got me hook, line, and sinker on that one.
Okay, how about West Wing and then The Newsroom?
It's very similar, and you'll see that. Like, I'll link to those supercuts in the comments of this episode,
okay,
so that people can take a look at it. This individual turns of phrase or plot lines or things that they say, he definitely reuses them across all. And this is going to be the second week in a row where I direct you guys over to Cracked, and I know that like I'm becoming a one-trick pony because I'm always telling you to go check out stuff over there. I literally just listened to a podcast this morning that they released that was about the auteur theory and actor and how big of an impact actors can have on stuff like that. And you had mentioned it, that directors, oftentimes overdo certain things, or they cannibalize their own material, or they redo stuff over and over. And it was a super interesting podcast where they pointed out stuff like Brad Pitt eats in every movie, or Tom Cruise runs in every movie, which I know Ryan wrote an article about. They really do a good job of covering the gamut. They don't touch on any females, but they talk about a ton of actors. And it was an interesting hour car ride that I had this week.
That's good.
And then Scarlett Johansson is attractive in every movie.
I know, man. This Scarlett Johansson actress auteur thing where she just has to be attractive all the time. It's really getting old. That same shtick is really getting old.
I mean, even her voice in Her was all sexy and attractive, and I wanted to date my operating system after I watched it.
Wait, you're not currently dating your operating system?
Touche, brother. Touche.
Okay.
Siri and I have a thing on the side I haven't told anybody about yet.
Fuck Siri.
You just did.
Did any of you guys do your homework?
Yes. I have actually seen all three of the movies you guys talked about last week. You talked about, I know that, Keith, you brought up Wolf of Wall Street. You brought up Boiler Room.
Glengarry Glen Ross.
There you go. I've seen all three of those movies.
Also Wall Street.
Oh, I did not. I have not seen that one, though.
That's okay.
I've seen Wall Street as well. Yeah. I went through a binge a couple of years ago after I stopped working for Chase. I used to work for JP Morgan Chase, doing investment sales and stuff like that. After I quit there, I went on a binge of watching movies that commented on the banking industry and commented on the investment industry. And I watched Wall Street and Glengarry Glen Ross and Boiler Room, and there were a couple of documentaries that were really good. There was
Too Big to Fail?
Too Big to Fail, and then they made Too Big to Fail into a TV movie, I believe.
Land Before Time. Oh.
Is that the same thing? Are we talking about?
Yeah, totally. It's an allegory for Wall Street, man.
The moral outrage of Sharptooth?
Littlefoot is...
Gordon Gekko?
Moron.
Littlefoot was my name in college.
Yeah. Littlefoot was your name in college?
Yeah.
There has to be a story there.
But yeah.
Well, I apologize. I think I helped derail this conversation far too much. So.
It's okay. You're okay.
What I was going to say is maybe, since Keith brought up this topic, maybe, Keith, you could just give a quick synopsis of the movies for the listeners that haven't done their homework or are tuning in for the first time, just to get a sense on, maybe the differences or the commonalities between the movies.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what's great is that the movies are they're intertwined. They're related because Wall Street comes first, and then Glengarry Glen Ross comes, and then Boiler Room comes, and then Wolf of Wall Street. So that's the chronological order. And then in Boiler Room, there's mention to both Glengarry Glen Ross and Wall Street. And then in the Wolf of Wall Street, there's mention to Boiler Room. So it's just it's kind of interesting to see how obviously The premise of the movies are relatively the same in the sense that there is a lot of smoke and mirrors. There's a lot of, big risks taken, high risk, high reward scenarios. But at the end of the day, it's like, it's just kind of cool how those are like the quintessential movies in the genre. So with Wall Street, you've got Michael Douglas's Gordon Gekko. He is like the epitome of the 80s Wall Street type. He's got the multicolored Oxford button-downs with like the white collar and the white cuffs, and it's like a dark blue, and he's wearing suspenders, and you can smoke anywhere you want. And it was at the height of the stock market buzz, and everyone was in the stock market. And obviously the crash came, so that was what was Oliver Stone's kind of inspiration. And Oliver Stone directed, co-wrote, and actually starred in the movie as well. So that was kind of a cool little nugget. But basically, Gordon Gekko is like the man. He's on Forbes magazine, and then Charlie Sheen is Buddy Fox, this guy that comes up from humble beginnings, and he basically idolizes Gordon Gekko, and he wants to be just like him. And so yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, that's kind of like the backdrop. So long story short, Bud Fox gets in, goes to work for Gordon Gekko, sees the inside or how the sausage is made, so to speak. Doesn't like the way it turns out, doesn't like what he turns into. But that's pretty awesome. That's probably my favorite of all the movies. And then I got to say the second one, my second favorite is Glengarry Glen Ross. It's based on a play that won a Pulitzer Prize, which I did not know.
Wow.
By definitely back and doing homework, I actually found that out. It's based on Chicago real estate agents. The sales movie. Alec Baldwin gives the sales speech in that movie. So if you haven't seen it, do yourself a favor, just YouTube that scene, and then do yourself a favor and YouTube the scene from Malice, where he says he's God. And you don't even need to watch cinema anymore. You could die tomorrow. Fine.
I think that's the thing that all of these movies in a nutshell is they're like the quintessential sales movie. So everyone who does sales for a living likes to talk about how they get the sale, how they close the sale, talk about times when they made a tough sale, and they really like to hear stories about that sort of thing. And within each of these movies, there's kind of a quintessential sales pitch or a sales speech, and the rest of the movie is just wrapped around that. Gordon Gekko has his greed is good speech, and Glengarry Glen Ross, you have Alec Baldwin's speech. The whole movie is just wrapped around that one speech, so that way we can talk like badasses about sales. And that's what these movies really do.
Don't leave the other two out. Don't leave the other two out, because then you got Matt McConaughey's speech to Leo DiCaprio when they take him out to lunch. Yeah, thank you. All right.
And Leo has a couple of speeches of his own in that movie.
Great work.
Yep.
Great work. And then in Boiler Room, Ben Affleck pitches it in the group sales presentation, where it's the group interview. He's like, all right, I'm fucking liquid. You want details? He like throws his Ferrari car keys on the table. That's probably the coolest scene out of Boiler Room right there. Or when Vin Diesel tells Giovanni Ribisi to get the fuck out of the sales floor. He just like wanders into the room, and everyone's on the phone. It's loud as hell. And Vin Diesel covers up the mic or the receiver, and he's like, "Hey kid, get the fuck out of here!" And everyone just like goes quiet. And Giovanni Ribisi looks like he just saw a ghost and hightails it out of there. I love that.
Yeah.
movie.
One of the allures of all these movies, I think, is the alpha male mentality of the main characters.
Sure.
And I think as a male in our society, we're trained to value money a lot more than maybe we should, and we glamorize the life of these people. But in every single one of them, we see, and I guess I'm not that familiar with Wall Street, but we see the other side of it too, which is cool. It's almost the necessary component of the movie to show how these people falter as they live their life in this high-intensity world.
Well, to that point, the money blinds. I mean, the money is the root of all, like the aspirations of these people. You've got these young, hungry kids that want to make money, and in Wall Street, it's insider trading is what it's about. I mean, Charlie Sheen's character, his father is like head of the union for Blue Star Airlines, and he takes it to Gordon Gekko, and that's how he actually gets to work for Gordon Gekko, is that's the inside piece of information that he gives him. Gordon Gekko ends up taking Blue Star and guts it, makes off with the pension plan, makes off with all this money, and he basically guts Blue Star and there's nothing left. And Charlie Sheen was betrayed because he was under the impression that they were going to build this company and really make it something. And that's one of the scenes. It's phenomenal. Charlie Sheen's character, Bud Fox, is like, "What did you do?" He's like, "Why did you wreck it?" He's like, "Because it was wreckable." He's like, "I took a look at the numbers." He's like, it's so passionate. It is like the best scene. He's like, "Because it was wreckable." He's just like, "Fuck you, I can do whatever I want." I'm like, man.
I think that Brent's point about it being about the alpha male is totally valid, and the reason why is that you just talked about a super powerful scene in that movie. You talked about the moral of the movie and the overall theme of it. But when people talk about Wall Street, they don't talk about that. They talk about greed is good.
Right.
When people talk about Glenn Ross, they don't talk about emotional toll that this alpha male takes on, Jack Lemmon and Alan Arkin and those guys who are having a tough day, and they don't talk about the overall theme of the movie. They talk about that speech. They talk about the alpha male in the room and how badass he was in that speech. And they use those speeches, which are essentially the cautionary tale of the movie, those speeches, but they use them to pump them up so that they can go sell more cars or they can go sell more investments or whatever it is that the salesman who loves and champions that movie is supposed to do. So the reason why my favorite of the four is Glengarry Glen Ross is because it's nice and quick. It's only 100 minutes. So if you're going to make a movie-length commercial for one badass speech, make it as quick and dirty and simple as possible. And I think that Glengarry Glen Ross is just so tight. And the reason why Wolf of Wall Street wasn't, my cup of tea wasn't because it wasn't good. There were plenty of great scenes in that movie, but the thing was 180 minutes long. That's way too long for me to watch a movie about Leonardo DiCaprio doing Quaaludes and selling investments. Like, it's just way too long. And I feel that way about most movies nowadays, but you cut 45 minutes out of Wolf of Wall Street, and it's a much tighter, much better movie.
Yeah. Well, and here's the minute or the 30-second elevator pitch on Glengarry Glen Ross is 2 days of subpar salesman bitching about leads, and then a phenomenal job by Alec Baldwin. And then, you could basically cut it there. And the cast is amazing. But that's pretty much the entire movie is they're bitching about how bad the leads are. They want the Glengarry Glen Ross leads, and Alec Baldwin is a stud. That's pretty much the movie in a nutshell.
And I think anyone that's worked in sales, and I'm sure 75% of Americans have in some capacity or another, even if it's just a high school job, can appreciate sometimes these alpha male characters in all of these movies. There is something to be learned from them, just how reckless they go after what they want, and regardless of the quality of, the input, they make it their own, they own it, and they own the results, and thus they feel like they get to live the grandiose life that results in their pursuits. But the lesson to be learned probably is that part of it, just, the gumption with which these alpha males, go to work on this stuff. So let me derail the conversation a little bit, if I may. As I'm thinking about all the other possible Wall Street movies, one that comes up and also plays into the alpha male part of the conversation a bit, in my mind at least, is American Psycho.
Sure.
Yeah.
That's obviously the off-the-wall example.
Same era as Wall Street, though. I mean, it fits the mold, for sure.
Yeah, but I mean, here's a guy, in that movie, I think most people are fairly well-versed on kind of the overall plot. It's a black comedy, in a sense. The main character played by
Christian Bale.
The absolute chameleon that is Christian Bale plays the main character, who is a guy working on Wall Street, investment banker, and clearly just has let the power get to his head and gone to really bad places in his mind. There's debate as far as whether he did these things or not, but you see over the course of the movie he kills a bunch of people and just takes advantage of shallow friends and the power that he has because he's wealthy and in the limelight. That's, again, an alpha male that went one place. There's definitely a big difference between that character and Jordan Belfort from Wolf of Wall Street. There were a lot of things that Leonardo DiCaprio's character in Wolf of Wall Street did that was immoral, but I think at the end of the day, most of us still feel like he was just a victim in a lot of ways of kind of the circumstances, whereas Jason Bates, I think, is the character's
Patrick
name.
Bates.
Patrick Bates, thank you.
Bateman.
Patrick Bateman, there it is.
Bateman.
Jason, yes, Patrick Bateman.
Patrick
Fucking Jason
Jason
Biggs.
Bateman.
Fucking Jason Biggs getting me confused on my podcast.
But I think you're totally on to something there, though, because it's like, what's the number one scene that people remember from that movie? It's the business card scene where they're all sitting around and valuing the wrong stuff.
Yeah.
And that's what all of these, that's kind of what we've been talking about, is movies where the thing you remember and the thing you talk about with your friends and the thing you share as an example of, you know, how cool that movie was and how cool that character was and how fucked up it was. You're always sharing the thing, which is the cautionary tale scene of the movie of you're valuing the wrong shit. And, you know, they're talking about how expensive their business card was.
Or the raised lettering. Is that bone?
Yeah.
Yeah, see, it's the same thing. We can quote a scene about business cards from that movie, but I bet you there's something a lot more poignant toward the end where we see this guy fall off his damn rocker that we couldn't do the same thing.
Well, I personally like where he invites Jared Leto's character back to his apartment.
Square.
Yeah, and he's like giving you this like total Billboard-esque breakdown of Huey Lewis. How overlooked he is, and then he's like got all the newspaper down on the floor, and Jared Leto's character's like, "What, do you have a puppy? I bet it's a Chihuahua." And he's got like a garbage bag on, getting ready to fucking put an axe to his face. Probably one of my
dancing the whole time.
Yeah,
I thought that was the scene you were gonna bring up, Dave. But I think what you brought up was a better place for us to explore. And
I was
definitely
tying it all together, you know. I was just trying to bring it together.
That was the pretty bow, and I love that idea. And I know that I'm a culprit of really overvaluing the parts of movies that are just supposed to be eye candy, because I think Hollywood has to pump eye candy out for films to even get made. And so a lot of times, whether you're a naive teenager or a naive 30-year-old like me, I have to then sit and really stew on something for a while, unless it's laid out for me in an article that I look up when I come home from the theater or, you know, shut down Netflix or whatever. Unless it's laid out for me, I don't always perceive it right away. And so the meaning and the theme and all that stuff definitely gets lost in translation, I think, sometimes because of the eye candy. And I know that's why some people make an argument that the written word is better, because there's not much you can do except try to evaluate theme and pull metaphor out of texts. So
I think they have to give you that stuff. They have to give you the scene you're going to talk about the next day. Otherwise, how do they get word of mouth advertising? How do they get anybody to go see it? They can't just pump the meaning of the movie directly at you. Otherwise, it becomes a lecture. So I mean, that stuff has to be there. And honestly, I would never have talked to anybody about Glengarry Glen Ross without the Alec Baldwin scene. So there's that.
Yep, it's just like anything. You know, the marketing is what sells the fantastic product. It's not always the fantastic product that sells itself. So I get it. I totally get it, but it is just a sad state of human nature in a lot of ways that we need some of the glam and the glitz.
So we were talking about alpha males in movies. I'd like to talk about some real alpha males.
Testosterone cast.
Testosterone cast.
Seriously, it's about to go there. So my cheesy segue aside, I have been enthralled in the NBA free agency stuff, and for the listeners, we're recording this on Tuesday, July 8th. So all the dominoes might have fallen. Carmelo Anthony might have signed with the Vancouver Grizzlies. Who knows? We don't know what's going to happen. And yes, I know the Vancouver Grizzlies don't exist anymore. But we don't know what's going to happen. But the thing that I found really fascinating is the way in which the entire structure of the league and the roster of almost every team in the league hinges on about 3 players. And this summer it's all come down to LeBron, as it did in 2010, where the league is paralyzed and afraid to act until he chooses where he's going to go because if they go out and spend some of their salary cap money on a couple of guys who are a little bit lesser talent, and LeBron ends up leaving Miami, their fan bases are going to freak the fuck out that they spent their salary cap money and didn't have a shot at it at all. So it's crazy how paralyzed some NBA front offices are, and also pretty much every other player in the league. They're all afraid to do anything because they don't know where this guy's going to go and where all the chips are going to fall when they do. It's insane to me.
I'm so glad you brought this topic up, because as someone who just vaguely follows any sport other than the NFL, it is baffling to me how few news flashes come up about guys signing places right now. And I think you nailed it on the head, and I didn't even really put the pieces together. Again, as a Colts fan and an NFL fan, as I've broadcast before, I think the LeBron thing, the closest you can probably equate that to in recent memory is Peyton Manning coming free, but he came free before free agency actually started. So he was already signed, sealed, delivered to the Broncos, I think a month before actual free agency started. I would definitely be curious to see, had a guy like that been available and on the market at the very start of free agency, if something like that would happen. Because in general in the NFL, in a way that's unlike the NBA, I feel, the best players never come free. The best players in the NFL are on one team forever and or traded, right at the right time, or let go 1 year too late type of thing before they can hit that next ultra rich deal. So it is the sports business aspect of all that is fascinating to me, because it's clear that contracts are structured a lot differently in the NBA, and guys play a lot longer in the NBA and can be good a lot longer in the NBA, which changes the landscape entirely.
So there's two major things that I've really, because it's the only thing I hear about on sports radio right now in Chicago, because we're watching for Melo and we're watching for this and watching for that and hoping that Derrick Rose will be healthy or whatever so that we can make a run in the Eastern Conference. The two things that make the NBA so vastly different from the NFL, one is easy to see and one is not. The first is there are only 5 guys on the floor at a time, and one really, really great player can change whether your team's a playoff team or a lottery team. So that's the one thing, is because there are so few true impact players, it really does matter where they end up. And if you don't have one, as the Bulls have been lacking for the last couple of years while Derrick Rose is out, you start your season knowing that you're going to get into the playoffs probably, because half the teams in the league do. Even if you have a under 500 record, it's still possible you can make it to the playoffs. But if you don't have a 1 or 1A type player, you're going to come up against those teams in the playoffs and you're going to be fucked, and LeBron's going to end up in the finals again. So that's the first part. And the second part, which is a little bit harder to see unless you're really paying attention to it, is that after the new CBA, the collective bargaining agreement that they signed, players have these crazy opt-out. Almost every player, it sounds like, has these crazy opt-outs in their contract so that they can, I don't think this was the reasoning for them to be put in the first place, but the result is that now that a bunch of these guys can orchestrate when they're going to opt out all at the same time to totally change the landscape of the league. And it happened 4 years ago, and it's happening again now, where if LeBron chooses tomorrow that he wants to go to the Lakers will essentially trade away anything that's taking up salary cap space and sign up him and Carmelo and Chris Bosh and whoever LeBron wants to max deals, and he can pretty much create the fantasy basketball team he's always wanted, which is insane. There's no player in any league that has that much power.
Nope.
It's crazy. And the league wasn't like that in the 90s when I was a real basketball fan, when I was watching 70 Bulls games a year live when the Jordan and Pippen years were going on. The league wasn't like that. Again, you mentioned that star players just didn't leave their teams because they were signed to these gigantic deals, and I think it was Barkley or Mark Jackson or one of those former basketball players that said players didn't want to leave their team and go join a rival just so that they could win a title. They wanted to beat them. and prove that they were the best.
Yeah.
It's totally not the case anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think Gary Payton was another one of those guys. I think Gary Payton was another one of those guys that I missed. But yeah, they all just said, I want to beat, like, Karl Malone didn't want to be on the Bulls in the prime of his career. He wanted to beat the Bulls in the prime of his career.
And I think I don't know if it's personal pride. I think there was something about, like, the Larry versus, Bird versus Magic thing.
Right.
There were superstar players that were on these teams that were consistently good, and they kind of made those teams, and yes, there were bit players and things like that, but that was way more important to them, obviously, was just their own stardom, seeing it through long term to turn that into championships or whatever. And now, because it's similar to our society in general, we want the easy fix, so it's put 7 players on the same team so that you got 2 guys that can come off the bench and still be ridiculously good, instead of that one player.
One thing I think that I've heard a lot of people kick around that is the change in mindset in the league is that all these guys grow up playing AAU basketball together now, it was not the case back then. You wouldn't play. There was no organized AAU basketball with scouts when Jordan was in 8th grade. That just wasn't a thing back then. And now it totally is, because if you have a great career as an 8th grader, you can end up getting scouted by colleges and essentially recruited by Nike and Adidas until you're legally able to take that contract. So it's pretty crazy that.
Well, again, it's the internet, man. I mean, it's access. Yeah. It's what it comes down to is access. Yeah. There wasn't as much access back then.
It almost seems like the player's individual brand is more important than the integrity of the game or the competitiveness or parity of the league.
Well, to that point, though, that didn't exist until Michael Jordan, really. I mean, Michael Jordan was the first one to create a brand. I think he was probably the most successful at it. Because if you look at basketball prior to Michael Jordan, there wasn't anyone that branded themselves. I mean, Bill Russell won 11 rings in 13 seasons. Where's his brand?
I guess that's what I was talking about. I think the branding just took a turn at one point, because I do feel like Magic and Bird had their own brands, but it was as much tied to the Lakers and the Celtics as it was them, and it wasn't them trying to profit. It was them trying to build their brand as the superstar for that team, for the betterment of that team and that community and things like that. At least that's what I perceived when I was really young. But then, Jordan kind of became an entrepreneur with it and let his brand turn into a legit brand that then also made him money.
Yeah. You brought up the NFL. My fantasy draft is in roughly 6 weeks, Brent. Is now the time when you really start boning up for yours?
Nope.
When do you do it?
I wait. I always wait. If someone proposed to me to be in a league and draft in the middle of the summer, which a lot of people do now, I don't do Dynasty, and I'm curious to actually consider doing Dynasty leagues now at this point, because my philosophy is and has always been, and I've explained it before, the reason I'm so interested in the draft is I want to be able to predict the breakout players in fantasy. So I remember that wide receiver that was drafted 2 years ago and is just coming up in the ranks, on the depth chart, and their star player went to a different team, so that guy should be stepping into a starting role and things like that. So that's where I am with fantasy, is I always have those guys in the back of my mind, and I want to see how training camp and preseason football goes, because that also will highlight, okay, this rookie looks like he is ready to contribute now, versus, nope, he's going to need a year or two to marinate. So that's where I try to get my work done on prepping for fantasy football, is training camp and preseason. So that's unfortunately when everybody else tends to do it too. So if you find good resources, I'm a big fan of Roto World. Evan Silva is one of my favorite follows on Twitter. Guy is super on top of figuring out who to target for fantasy football, breakout stars. I think they do a lot of good work on Roto World. It's part of the NBC Sports conglomerate, but that's my favorite resource for fantasy, at least. And at the same time, I don't always use them because I'm lazy and cocky, and I think I've got it all pretty much figured out on my own. So,
all right. Well, when we get closer, you'll have to give me a couple of people to keep an eye on.
Oh, for sure. One that I'm really high on is Ruben Randall in New York.
Oh, yeah?
That was actually kind of the example I was vaguely alluding to. Ruben Randall is a wide receiver that was drafted by the New York Giants in the 2012 draft. Hakeem Nicks signed with the Indianapolis Colts, so there's clearly a wide open door for Ruben Randall to step into a full-time starter role. He had a couple games last season where he looked pretty legit and was clearly kind of ready for that jump, performed at a pretty high level, and so I think he'll be somebody that really outperforms some of the predictions. But again, I don't know how many times his name is being mentioned on some of the fantasy football websites. So
nice.
That's one that I'll give you tonight and the rest of the Double Back listeners. And
That'll
you tell me in all the normal spots, Facebook, Twitter, right there on the website, hit us up in the comments. Tell me some of your fantasy football studs. Tell us where you think LeBron James is going to head. Tell us why you think branding of NBA players in today's society is changing out the lay of the land for free agency. We'd love to hear from you.
And if all of the free agency dominoes have fallen, just head over to the comments and tell us how dumb we are for talking about it one full week in advance.
Please, right. We always welcome, hey, you guys are dumb because comments.
That was.
I mean, honestly, I think we could make that a recurring. We could make that a recurring theme over at Doubleback. Hey, you guys are dumb because.
You guys are dumb because fill in the blank. We love that stuff.
So what are you guys looking forward to this week? What are you going to double back on?
Anything that has to do with fantasy football is off my list.
What's on your list?
You guys are dumb as shit because I'm friends with you and you talk about things I don't like. So what are you looking forward to trying to double back on this week? Keith?
That's a really good question. I'm looking to expand my James Spader game a little bit.
Ooh.
Yeah, I'm a big fan. So I'm going to try to brush up on the secretary, and I'm also going to try to brush up on a little bit of maybe Boston Legal, see how I'm feeling about that.
Cool. Are you watching? There's a show he's on right now.
Blacklist. No.
Yeah, I like that. That's a good deal. What about you, Dave? You got anything in cues coming up here?
I mean, I started mentioning this before we started the podcast.
No, you don't say things like that on the podcast. Jesus.
Yeah. Sorry, guys. But I really feel like I'm going to flex my HBO Go muscles this week and double back on some television. I know that Topher put up a really great piece on True Detective a couple of months back on the site, and Brent has been talking about True Detective lately, and I've stealthily avoided spoilers for it this long, so I feel like my luck is going to run out sooner or later, so I need to get on that.
You do need to get on that.
And pointed out it's a
homework.
It's a fantastic one, yeah. So I'm gonna get back into my HBO Go queue and try and get through some Matthew McConaughey and Woody Harrelson before it gets spoiled on me.
Awesome. I love it. I'm also on an HBO Go kick a little bit right now, so I would strongly recommend True Detective, and let's maybe even try to target that as a conversation piece for the next podcast. We can revisit Topher's, like you mentioned, excellent article on it, which actually has really good links in it. So when you pull that up, make sure you go ahead and do some diving into the outside links that he mentioned in there. I found some additional things that I think are worth talking about too, so maybe we'll cover that next week. But my HBO Go, frenzy, I think will include some of the stuff that I did enjoy a little bit through friends and things like that before when I didn't have HBO. I never got around to watching the Seinfeld season of Curb Your Enthusiasm when they brought them all back on, so that's actually a target for me, is going back. I've often heard that was what ended up being the better conclusion for the Seinfeld series rather than the actual season finale. So that's on my to-do list for this next couple weeks.
Have you guys peeped out comedians in cars getting coffee?
Great series.
I still haven't, but I need to. I really do.
We should talk about that next time because I love it. That's really, really well done.
Let's link to that in the comments as well.
Fantastic idea.
We actually did a write-up about that on the site.
I think two easy ones that I've seen and I think are at least wide enough known comedians where they're kind of easily accessible for people. There's one with Jay Leno that paints him in a lot different light than he was as the Tonight Show host. You know, I had really gotten pretty sour on Jay Leno by the end of his run, a lot because he bumped Conan and things like that. But that was the Comedians in Cars was absolutely interesting to me, just to see him out of the Tonight Show element. And then the other one that I think is at least easily accessible for me is Louis C.K. I think our generation's pretty high on him right now, so that's another good Comedians in Car episode. And it kind of is the opposite of what I was just saying. Louis C.K. is Louis C.K. no matter what. It's very clearly evidenced in the Comedians in Cars episode.
My favorite is with Alec Baldwin. Big fucking surprise.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, you have an Alec Baldwin man crush that I think we need to talk about further. We need to devote some more time to this thing.
Yeah, okay.
One thing I kind of think, I don't know if we need to do it next time, but one thing I'd like to talk about is movies or TV shows or books or whatever that you guys just don't get it. Like, they are popular, they are critically acclaimed, and you just don't understand why. Like, I don't get why this thing is so popular. And I have a couple of examples, but I think we should save it for next time.
I've got stuff on the tip of my tongue, too, so we should definitely save it.
Iggy Azalea's Fancy. I don't understand why that's such a popular song.
we can dive into Iggy Azalea on the next podcast.
No, yeah, I think there are a ton of examples that we can get to there. There's a lot of mileage there, but there's some things that just fucking baffle me. I don't get it.
Well, I can't wait to hear about your baffledom on episode 11. And if anyone else has some ideas on things we need to double back on or commentary on this podcast's topics, definitely please, as I mentioned, make sure you get on Facebook and let us know what you're thinking. Get on Twitter and put us in, put yourself in our mentions so we can try to interact a little bit with you there. Hit us up here in the comments. Click on the links to some of the stuff we referenced, and we'll see you kids next time.
Bang your guns, Brian.
Bang your guns, gentlemen.
Pew, 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 pew.